Films being cancelled during development is incredibly common, though it's decidedly rarer for a picture to be shelved after shooting, typically the most arduous and expensive stage of production, has taken place. And yet it does occasionally happen, for one of a multitude of reasons. So let's take a look at some examples, shall we? I'm Ellie for What Culture, and these are 10 movies that were scrapped after being shot. Number 10, Batgirl. Let's kick things off with by far the highest profile scrapped movie in recent memory, if not ever. In March 2022, Warner Brothers wrapped principal photography on a Batgirl solo movie starring Leslie Grace. Though initially intended to go direct to HBO Max, Warner Brothers considered upgrading the $90 million blockbuster to a theatrical release in 2022. However, that summer, the shock announcement came that Batgirl's release had been cancelled outright, with the new executive regime at the recently merged Warner Brothers Discovery deciding to focus on theatrical blockbusters, in turn writing Batgirl off for a tax break. Conflicting reports emerged about less than stellar test screenings for the film, which apparently still needed VFX work and additional photography. Yet scrapping such a high-profile tentpole project was virtually unheard of. And to make matters even worse, the cast and crew weren't even given a heads up about the news, only learning about Batgirl's cancellation as the rest of the world did. Now, though some fans hope that Batgirl could be unshelved one day, that does seem unlikely given the tax break situation. Regardless of the film's rumoured quality though, Warner Brothers was widely criticised by fans and filmmakers alike for this decision. Number 9, Empires of the Deep. Empires of the Deep is a 3D fantasy adventure film which began shooting in 2009. The $130 million production was partially funded by Chinese real estate tycoon John Zhang, amid the desire to create his own blockbuster IP on the level of Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, or Avatar. However, production was an abject disaster from start to finish. The script had contributions from 10 screenwriters and took 40 drafts to complete. Shooting cycled through 3 different directors, and numerous cast members quit mid-production due to non-payment. Principal photography was nevertheless completed by late 2010, with a release intended for 2011, but the picture ultimately failed to find distribution. Reshoots were conducted in 2014, and in 2016 a crowdfunding campaign was launched to finish post-production, which failed. Almost a decade later, Empires of the Deep remains submerged in limbo, and there's no indication it's ever going to be completed or released. Number 8, Golden. Last summer, director Michael Gondry filmed Golden, a coming-of-age musical biopic centered around the childhood of musician Pharrell Williams. However, Universal recently announced that the film's release had been cancelled, with Gondry and Williams releasing a joint statement that they decided, quote, there wasn't a path forward once they got into the editing room. While this quite obviously implies that Golden's quality fell far short of the expected mark, subsequent reports claimed that a recent test screening for the film went incredibly well, and it perhaps even had the hallmarks of an awards contender. But Golden, which is in the early stages of post-production, will not be completed, with Universal taking a $20 million hit on the project to maintain their working relationship with Williams. It's incredibly rare for a film to be scrapped so far into production, because the creatives in charge felt it wasn't coming together. Typically, studios will simply forge ahead and try to make the best of a bad situation. But it's even more puzzling if, as claimed, Golden is actually good. Number 7, The Day the Clown Cried. There is perhaps no single more infamous scrapped film than The Day the Clown Cried, a 1972 drama written, directed and starring Jerry Lee Lewis as a German circus clown who is imprisoned in a concentration camp. Filming was fraught with issues, such as Lewis having to stump up $2 million of his own cash to complete shooting after a producer ran out of money. But the real problems didn't emerge until the film entered post-production. At this point, the various parties with claims on the picture couldn't agree on terms for its release, and so The Day the Clown Cried was simply never finished. The film quickly entered the annals of Hollywood legend, and over the decades has remained one of the most fascinatingly sought-after lost movies, largely due due to its peculiar and controversial premise. In 2015, Lewis finally submitted an incomplete print of the film to the Library of Congress, with the condition it couldn't be screened until 2024. And indeed, last year it was screened privately for the New Republic's Benjamin Charles Jermaine Lee, who revealed that Lewis's footage was a fragmentary 5-hour assembly rather than anything close to a coherent film. And with that revelation, any remaining optimism about The Day the Clown Cried finally getting a long-belated release basically evaporated. Number 6. Gore. In 2017, Kevin Spacey shot Gore, a biopic of legendary writer Gore Vidal, as directed by Michael Hoffman, and set to release on Netflix in 2018. However, just 3 weeks after shooting wrapped, sexual misconduct allegations were levelled against the actor, which prompted Netflix to not only dismiss Spacey from his hit TV show House of Cards, but to shelve Gore entirely. Though some initially speculated whether Hoffman's film might see the light of day eventually, reports later emerged that it contained numerous sequences of Vidal engaging in predatory sexual behaviour with young men, an uncomfortable enough parallel with real life to likely ensure Gore will forever remain unreleased. Netflix ultimately lost an estimated $39 million by severing ties with Spacey, with most of these costs being attributed to the scrapping of Gore, an intriguing biopic project on paper that few would now have the stomach for without the lead role being recast. Number 5. The Mothership. In the summer of 2021, Halle Berry shot The Mothership, a new sci-fi family film for Netflix that was set to be the directorial debut of Oscar-nominated writer Matt Charman. Brief footage of the film was even included in Netflix's 2022 content preview, but in early 2024, the streamer revealed that The Mothership had been shelved, offering vague reasoning about a protracted post-production process. Reporter Jeff Snyder later added that the key issue involved the young central cast, who had grown noticeably since production wrapped in August 2021, making it nigh on impossible for reshoots to be reasonably conducted. Ultimately, Netflix's chief content officer said, quote, "Everybody just felt like it was the right thing to not do it," which is about as damning as statements get, don't you think? When the biggest streaming service on the planet is saying that the right thing to do is not to release a film, that there's no conceivable way to cobble together a passable cut of the existing footage, you know the straits are absolutely dire. Number 4. Big Bug Man. Big Bug Man is a hand-drawn animated TV film starring Brendan Fraser and Marlon Brando that was co-directed by writers and artists who'd worked on The Simpsons, and was originally set to release sometime between 2006 and 2008. Fraser voiced protagonist Howard Kind, a candy company employee who gained superheroic abilities after being bitten by an insect, while Brando portrayed the villainous Mr. Sour. There's been basically radio silence on the project from official channels since 2007, though it nevertheless remains a curiosity due to being the final project of Hollywood legend Marlon Brando, who died just a month after recording his lines. It's never been made clear how far along the film's animation was, though all of the voice acting was reportedly in the can. As for why production stopped, well, according to a writer who worked on Big Bug Man, quote, "The financing never gelled." Well, considering that $20 million is a tight sum for a hand-drawn animation with an A-list cast, it's hardly a surprising reason. Number 3. Bicowski. A staggering example of the importance of due diligence now, with 2013 James Franco shot Bicowski, a drama about the life of author Charles Bicowski, said to be an adaptation of Bukowski's own quasi-autobiographical novel Ham on Rye. By the next year, long after shooting had wrapped, Franco was sued by Cyril Humphries, who claimed to have the film rights to Ham on Rye and challenged Franco's legal ability to produce an adaptation without his approval. Though Humphries and Franco originally partnered on the project, that deal lapsed in 2010, though Franco proceeded with the shoot regardless without securing Humphries' involvement. Franco argued that his version of the film ultimately wasn't an adaptation of Ham on Rye, and the matter eventually resolved with an undisclosed settlement in late 2014. Now, while this left many assuming that Bicowski would soon be released, over a decade later it still has not materialized, and therefore likely never will. Number 2. Coyote vs. Acme. Warner Bros. Discovery strikes again, this time with Coyote vs. Acme, a live-action animation hybrid comedy in which Wile E. Coyote files a lawsuit against the Acme Corporation for its constantly backfiring products. The film, directed by Dave Green and written by Sammy Birch, was shot in early 2022, with a cast led by Will Forte, John Cena, and Lana Condor. Though the $72 million feature was initially set to release in July 2023, it was eventually pulled from Warner Bros.' slate, and in November 2023, they announced that despite the movie being completely finished, it would be shelved for a tax write-off of $30 million. However, the studio ultimately decided to allow the filmmakers to shop the project around to other distributors. And though Warner Bros. Received offers from the likes of Netflix, Amazon, and Paramount to buy Coyote vs. Acme, none of them met the $75 to $80 million the company wanted. Warner Bros. Again considered claiming a tax write-off on the film, though hasn't yet done so, stating last April that it was, quote, available for acquisition. So while there is a faint sliver of hope that Coyote vs. Acme could be uncancelled one day, you probably shouldn't get your hopes up. All the same, between the hilarious premise and apparently phenomenal test screening scores, it's frankly obscene that this film is being buried. Number 1, In God's Hands. And finally, we have what would be an utter nightmare scenario for any filmmaker. Director Lodge Kerrigan's third feature film was intended to be In God's Hands, a drama about the fallout of a child abduction, starring Maggie Gyllenhaal and Peter Sarsgaard. Though principal photography was completed without incident, the original camera negative somehow suffered irreversible damage, making it impossible to complete post-production on the film. Kerrigan understandably couldn't face the prospect of remaking the movie he'd just shot, but with the help of his producer Steven Soderbergh and an insurance payout from the original shoot, he instead began work on a new drama about child abduction, Keen, which released to mostly positive reviews in 2004. Thankfully, in the modern era of digital filmmaking, it's practically impossible for such a devastating incident to occur, though the fact that it did at all, frankly, beggars belief. Can you imagine losing all that hard work?